The celebration had been designed to feel inevitable. From a moment guests stepped into the grand hall, everything spoke of precision, triumph, and control. Light cascaded in carefully measured warmth across polished marble floors, catching on the intricate details of jewelry that had already begun to redefine the Logan brand's global identity. Conversations flowed effortlessly, threaded with admiration and anticipation. The air itself seemed to hum with the quiet certainty of success. At the center of it all stood Bill and Katie, the architects of a moment that had taken years to build. For Katie, the evening carried a deeper resonance. This was not just a professional victory, it was a reclamation. The Logan name, once overshadowed, now stood radiant and undeniable, its influence stretching beyond borders, beyond expectations. Every glance, every whispered compliment reinforced what she had fought so hard to achieve. Bill, beside her, carried that success differently. His pride was unmistakable, but beneath it lay something sharper, more vigilant. He had spent a lifetime navigating power, building it, protecting it, wielding it when necessary. Success, he knew, was never just an endpoint. It was a position, one that required constant defense. Still, for this one evening, even he allowed himself a measure of ease. The presentation had gone flawlessly. The audience, industry leaders, media figures, investors, had responded exactly as expected. Applause lingered, conversations buzzed, and the Logan brand seemed to rise higher with every passing moment. It should have remained that way. It didn't. The shift was subtle at first. A pause in conversation near the entrance. A ripple of attention moving outward, quiet but unmistakable. Then silence. Not complete, not immediate, but spreading, like something fragile being disturbed, like a collective breath being held without conscious agreement. Katie noticed it before she understood it. Her smile faltered slightly, her gaze following the direction of the room's attention. Bill's posture shifted beside her, instinct sharpening his focus before his mind could fully register the cause. And then they saw her. Luna no sawa. For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to stop, because she was not supposed to be there. She was not supposed to exist within this moment, within this reality. Luna belonged to a past that had been closed, defined, resolved. Her story had ended, or at least everyone had believed it had. But belief, as it turned out, was not the same as truth. She stood at the entrance, framed by light that seemed almost too deliberate, too theatrical to be accidental. Her presence was not hesitant. It was not uncertain. There was no trace of the fragility one might expect from someone stepping into a room filled with people who had long since accepted her absence. Instead, she was composed, steady, and in her arms, unmistakable, were two newborn children. The sight alone was enough to fracture the illusion of control that had defined the evening. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Eyes widened, disbelief spreading across faces that had only moments before been filled with admiration and celebration. Katie felt her pulse quicken, a cold unease settling into her chest. Beside her, Bill's expression hardened, not with confusion, but with recognition of something far more dangerous. This was not an accident. This was not a coincidence. This was an arrival, and it had been planned. Luna stepped forward, each movement deliberate, measured, her gaze fixed not on the crowd, not on the spectacle she was creating, but on a single point across the room. Will. He stood frozen, his body caught between instinct and shock, his mind struggling to reconcile what he was seeing with everything he believed to be true. His breath felt shallow, his thoughts fragmented, as if reality itself had shifted beneath his feet. Luna's eyes met his, and held. The silence deepened, because whatever came next would define everything. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly, cutting through the stillness with a calm that felt almost unnatural. "These are your children." The words did not explode. They landed, heavy, irrevocable. For a moment, no one reacted, because the mind, when confronted with something so unexpected, often resists before it accepts. Then the room changed. A collective intake of breath. Whispers, sharp, disbelieving, immediate, began to ripple outward, growing in intensity as the implications settled in. The name Spencer carried weight far beyond the personal. It was legacy, power, influence. And now, suddenly, it was entangled in something far more volatile. Wood did not move. He could not. His eyes remained fixed on Luna, on the children in her arms, on the reality that was unfolding in front of him with brutal clarity. His past, something he had believed was contained, resolved, had just stepped into the present and demanded recognition. "This isn't," he began, but the words faltered before they could take shape, because denial required certainty, and he had none. Across the room, Electra felt something inside her fracture. It wasn't loud, it wasn't immediate, but it was deep. Just moments before, she had been standing on the edge of something fragile and hopeful, a possibility, a return, a decision she had not yet fully made but had begun to consider. The tension between her and Will, unresolved but alive, had carried the quiet promise of something that might still be salvaged. Now, that possibility collapsed. Not gradually, instantly. Her gaze locked onto the scene, her mind racing to process what she was seeing, what she was hearing. Luna. Alive. 2 children. And the claim, clear, undeniable, that they belonged to Will. The pain was sharp, but beneath it was something else. Recognition. Because this was not random. This was not chaos. This was consequence. Electra took a step back, her breath unsteady, her thoughts colliding in ways she could not immediately untangle. Whatever connection she had been considering, whatever future she had been cautiously approaching, it was gone. Or at least, it no longer belonged solely to her. Bill moved then. The shift was immediate, instinctual. The personal shock, if it existed, was buried beneath something far more dominant. Strategy. Calculation. Control. Because what was happening in that room was no longer just a personal revelation. It was a public crisis. Media eyes were already watching. Phones had been lifted, cameras activated, every second captured and transmitted in real time. The narrative was forming even as the moment unfolded, shaping itself into something that would spread far beyond the walls of the event. Bill understood that faster than anyone, and he knew what it meant. The Spencer name was no longer just associated with success. It was now tied to scandal. He stepped forward, his presence cutting through the chaos with a force that demanded attention. "This is not the time or the place," he said, his voice controlled, but carrying an unmistakable authority. Luna did not flinch. She held her ground, her grip on the children steady, her gaze unwavering. "It's exactly the time," she replied, "and exactly the place." The tension escalated, because this was no longer about revelation. It was about confrontation. Will found his voice then, though it came strained, uncertain. "Luna, what are you doing?" he asked. Her expression softened, not with hesitation, but with something more complex. "Telling the truth," she said. "After all this time?" "Yes." The simplicity of the answer only made it more devastating. Katie stepped forward as well, her composure holding, but her eyes reflecting the storm beneath. "If you have something to say, this is not how you do it," she said. But Luna shook her head slightly. "It's the only way you would listen." The statement landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Because without this, without the spectacle, the disruption, the undeniable presence, she might have been dismissed, ignored, erased again. But now, there was no ignoring her, no dismissing the claim, because the proof stood in her arms. 2 lives, 2 undeniable realities. And the question that now hung over everything was not just whether her claim was true, but what it meant if it was. Will's mind raced, fragments of memory surfacing, moments he had long since placed in the past, now re-examined under a new, unforgiving light. Doubt crept in, not certainty, not acceptance, but possibility. And possibility was enough. Enough to destabilize. Enough to demand answers. Electra turned away, not because she didn't want to see, but because she couldn't continue watching something that was unraveling her from the inside out. The pain was too immediate, too raw, layered with everything else she was already carrying. Her pregnancy, her uncertainty, her fragile, complicated connection to Will. All of it collided in that moment, leaving her with no clear ground to stand on. Carter, watching from a distance, saw it all unfold with a growing sense of unease. The personal conflicts, the emotional fractures, the implications that extended far beyond individual lives. They were converging into something far larger, something dangerous. Because this wasn't just a scandal. It was a catalyst for legal consequences, for media frenzy, for power shifts that could redefine everything. Bill knew it too. Even as the room filled with noise again, questions, accusations, speculation, his focus remained sharp, forward-thinking. This was no longer about controlling a moment. It was about managing the aftermath, because the fallout had already begun, and it would not be contained easily. Luna stood at the center of it all, unshaken, her presence a challenge to everything that had been carefully constructed around her absence. She had returned not quietly, not cautiously, but with a force that demanded acknowledgement. And whether her claim was truth, manipulation, or something in between, it no longer mattered in that moment. Because the damage was done, the illusion was broken, and the lives of everyone in that room had just been irreversibly altered. As the night that had begun with celebration dissolved into chaos, one truth emerged with undeniable clarity. There would be no returning to what was before, only moving forward into something far more uncertain, far more dangerous, and far more real than any of them had been prepared to face. Bill Spencer did not believe in coincidences, especially not the kind that arrived unannounced, carrying 2 infants and a story powerful enough to destabilize an entire legacy. By the time the initial shock inside the Grand Hall had fractured into noise, questions, whispers, the relentless flicker of cameras, his mind had already moved beyond disbelief into strategy. He did not see Luna's return as a miracle, nor as an emotional reckoning. He saw a disruption, a calculated one, and disruptions, in his world, were rarely innocent. The declaration still echoed in the air. These are your children, its simplicity belying the magnitude of its implications. Will stood at the center of it, still suspended between reaction and comprehension, his expression stripped of certainty. Around him, the room continued to unravel, but Bill's focus narrowed sharply. Control the narrative. That instinct came first. He stepped forward again, this time not just as a father, but as the head of a name that could not afford scandal to spiral unchecked. His voice, when it cut through the noise, was calm but edged with authority that left little room for argument. "This ends now," he said, his gaze fixed on Luna. "If what you're claiming is true, we verify it. Immediately." The word immediately did not function as a suggestion. It was a command. Luna's expression did not shift in the way he expected. There was no hesitation, no visible calculation, only a quiet steadiness that unsettled him more than resistance would have. "I'm not afraid of the truth," she replied. That answer, simple as it was, created a ripple of tension that deepened rather than resolved the moment. Because if she had come prepared for this, if she had anticipated the demand for proof, then this was not impulsive. This was planned. Will finally moved, though his steps felt unsteady, as if the ground itself had yet to settle beneath him. "You should have told me," he said, his voice strained, searching for something, clarity, explanation, anything that might anchor him. Luna's gaze softened, but it did not waver. "I couldn't," she said. "Not then." The answer raised more questions than it resolved, but there was no space for them yet. Bill had already made his decision. The test would happen now, not tomorrow, not later, not after private discussions or careful deliberation. Now, the urgency was not just about truth, it was about containment. Every second that passed without resolution allowed speculation to grow, to spread, to take shape in ways that could not easily be undone. The media was already outside, already forming narratives from fragments, already transforming uncertainty into headlines. Bill would not allow them to define this story, not without facts. The transition from celebration to crisis management was swift, almost brutal in its efficiency. What had once been a stage for triumph became a holding ground for tension, every movement now measured, every word carrying consequence. Arrangements were made with precision, connections activated with the speed of someone accustomed to navigating high-stakes situations. Within an hour, the process had begun, and with it came the waiting. It was a different kind of silence that settled then, not the stunned quiet of shock, but the heavy, anticipatory stillness of something unresolved. Conversations became hushed, fragmented, as if speaking too loudly might alter the outcome. Katie felt it more deeply than anyone. She had not moved far from where she stood when Luna entered, but the world around her had shifted so dramatically that even standing still felt disorienting. Her gaze remained fixed on Will, her son, whose life had just been pulled into a direction neither of them had prepared for. A mother's instinct is not easily overridden, and in that moment, hers fractured into two opposing forces: protection and fear. She wanted to shield him from humiliation, from manipulation, from the possibility that he was being used in a way he could not yet see. But she also saw something else in Luna's presence, something she could not fully dismiss. The children, they were real. Their existence alone complicated everything. Katie's hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together, her composure slipping in ways she could not entirely control. "Bill," she said quietly, her voice tight with emotion, "what if this is exactly what it looks like?" He glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable. "Then we deal with it," he replied. "But what if it's not?" she pressed. "What if she's using them? Using him to get something?" The question lingered, heavy with implication, because it was not unreasonable. In their world, power attracted ambition. Wealth invited strategy. And vulnerability, especially public vulnerability, was often exploited. Bill did not dismiss her concern, but he did not allow it to dictate his response either. "That's why we verify," he said. The logic was sound. But logic did little to ease the fear building inside her. Across the room, Electra stood apart from the center of attention, though not entirely removed from its impact. The distance she had placed between herself and the unfolding situation was intentional, but it did not protect her from what it meant. She watched Will, not constantly, not in a way that would draw attention, but enough to see the shift happening in him, enough to understand what it meant. Because regardless of the outcome, something fundamental had already changed. If the test came back negative, the damage might be contained, but the questions, the doubts, the disruption would remain. If it came back positive, Electra closed her eyes briefly, as if the act might delay reality. But it wouldn't. Nothing would. Time moved forward regardless of readiness. And readiness in that moment felt impossible. The results came faster than expected. Or perhaps it only felt that way because every second had stretched under the weight of anticipation. When the confirmation arrived, it did not explode into the room. It settled, quietly, devastatingly. Bill read it first. His expression did not betray much. He had spent too many years mastering control for that. But something shifted in the set of his jaw, in the stillness that followed. Then he handed it to Will. The moment felt suspended, as if everything hinged on the space between recognition and acceptance. Will stared at the document, his eyes scanning the words that would redefine his life. For a fraction of a second, there was resistance, a subconscious attempt to reject what he was reading. But the truth did not bend. It remained clear, unavoidable. He was the father. The realization did not arrive with clarity. It came in waves. Shock, disbelief, and then something deeper. Responsibility. The room reacted then. Voices rising, questions overlapping, the fragile barrier of restraint finally breaking under the weight of confirmation. The media presence intensified, the narrative shifting instantly from speculation to fact. Spencer Eyre revealed as father of secret twins. The headlines were already forming. Katie's composure broke. Not completely, not in a way that drew attention, but enough that those closest to her could see it. Tears gathered, unbidden, her emotions colliding in a way that left her struggling to hold onto coherence. "My son," she whispered, the words carrying both love and fear. Because now, the question was no longer whether the claim was true. It was what came next. And what came next was inevitable. Conflict. Luna did not hesitate. The moment the truth was confirmed, she stepped forward, not with aggression, but with a quiet certainty that made her intentions clear. "I've been raising them alone," she said. "Hiding, moving, doing everything I could to keep them safe." The words shifted the narrative again, from accusation to justification. Will looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time since her arrival, something in his expression changed. The shock did not disappear, but it was joined by something else. Guilt. "Why didn't you come to me?" he asked, his voice low, strained. Luna's answer came without hesitation. "Because it wasn't safe," she said. "For me. For them." The implication settled heavily. Not just fear, but danger. "What are you talking about?" Bill demanded, his tone sharpening. Luna met his gaze, unflinching. "There are people who would use them," she said. "People who would come after them because of who they are." The statement introduced a new dimension. Because if it was true, if there were external threats, then this was no longer just a family matter. It was a security issue, a legal issue, a public relations crisis layered with potential danger. And suddenly, everything became more complicated. Will felt it most acutely. The weight of responsibility, of lost time, of a reality he had not been part of, settled heavily onto his shoulders. The idea that his children, had been raised in fear, in secrecy, without him, cut deeper than he expected. "I should have been there," he said quietly. Luna's expression softened again, but there was something calculated beneath it, something subtle, almost imperceptible. "You're here now," she replied. The words landed with quiet precision, because they offered something, redemption, or at least the possibility of it. And Will, already overwhelmed, already searching for something to hold on to, felt the pull of it. The shift was immediate, not drastic, but undeniable. His focus moved, subtly but clearly, toward Luna, toward the children, toward the reality that now demanded his attention. Electra saw it, even from a distance. And this time, there was no ambiguity. The space between them widened, not physically, but emotionally, in a way that felt far more permanent. Whatever connection had remained, whatever fragile thread had held them together, began to unravel under the weight of something neither of them had chosen. She turned away, because watching it happen felt like a kind of loss she was not ready to face. Carter, observing from the periphery, understood the shift for what it was. Not just a reaction, but the beginning of something more dangerous. Because Luna was not just revealing truth. She was positioning herself, carefully, strategically, and Will, in his state, was vulnerable to it. Will saw it too, and unlike Will, he did not view Luna's actions through the lens of emotion. He saw the pattern, the timing, the execution. This was not just survival. This was entry into the Spencer world. And once inside, the implications would extend far beyond personal relationships. Legal battles began almost immediately. Custody, parental rights, financial responsibility. Each issue layered with complexity, amplified by the public nature of the revelation. Lawyers were involved, statements prepared, strategies developed. The Spencer name had to be protected, but so did the children. And those two objectives did not always align. Katie found herself caught between them, her emotions pulled in opposing directions. She loved her son, wanted to support him, to guide him through something he had not chosen. But she did not trust Luna. Not fully. Not yet. And that doubt created tension that could not easily be resolved. Will, meanwhile, moved deeper into the role that had been thrust upon him. He visited Luna frequently, spent time with the children, learned routines, learned details, tried to make up for what he had missed. Each moment brought him closer, not just to them, but to Luna, and slowly, Almost imperceptibly, the boundaries began to blur. Because proximity creates connection. And connection, when combined with shared responsibility, can evolve into something more. Electra felt it happening even without seeing it directly. The distance, the silence, the absence. It was not intentional, not cruel, but it was real, and it hurt. Because she understood what was pulling him away, and she knew she could not compete with it. Nor should she. That realization settled heavily. Not as anger, but as acceptance. And acceptance, in this case, felt like loss. Bill, watching everything unfold, understood that the battle was far from over. The truth had been confirmed, but the consequences were still taking shape. And somewhere within it all, beneath the layers of emotion, legality, and public scrutiny, one reality remained clear. This was not the end of the disruption. It was the beginning of a conflict that would test not just the strength of the Spencer name, but the integrity of every relationship it touched. And as lines were drawn, alliances shifted, and motives revealed themselves piece by piece. One question lingered beneath it all. Was this truly just the truth coming to light, or the execution of something far more deliberate? Because if it was the latter, then the most dangerous